Hello. Welcome to Best Practices for Creating Reusable .NET Code. In this session, we'll take a look at a couple of ways that you can share code between your Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 applications. We'll see that one of the easiest ways to do that is with shared source or linked files, where you simply add a source code file to one project and then add it as a link to another project. We'll also talk about shared assemblies using the Portable Class Library project template in Visual Studio. And that's going to let you create a DLL assembly that you can directly reference from both your Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 applications. And then we'll mention that using some best practices and patterns like MVVM will simplify your code reuse. Now, it's important to understand in this session we're talking about .NET code reuse in Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 applications. We're not talking about HTML5 JS app reuse, and that's because Windows Phone 8 doesn't support native HTML5 JS apps the same way Windows 8 does. If you do, however, need to create cross-platform HTML5 JavaScript apps, you could look at some of the application frameworks like PhoneGap, also known as Apache Cordova, or some of the UI libraries like jQuery Mobile. You could also look at creating cross-platform games using some of the gaming frameworks like Yo-Yo Game Maker or Skira Construct 2. This is a hot topic in the industry right now, and new tools are always popping up, so you want to keep your eyes open. So as I mentioned, one of the easiest ways to share code between your Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 projects is to simply share the source files themselves. And you can do that very easily by creating a source code file in one project, and then going to the other project, adding an existing item, browse to the existing source code in the original project, and then at the bottom on that add button, rather than just clicking add, if you click in the drop down arrow, there's a menu item for add as link. And that basically links the source code files together so that you can have one copy of it instead of two separate copies that you have to maintain. That's really cool, and it's really easy if the exact same source works in both platforms. And in some cases, that could be all you need to do. There is, however, likely going to be some code that needs to be different in Windows 8 than it does in Windows Phone 8. And for that, we're going to have a way that we can sort of have either code specifically for Windows 8 compiled in the Windows 8 environment versus Phone 8 code being compiled in the phone environment, or maybe where we have some separate files that have that different code in it. So if we want to look at conditional compilation, one of the first things we have to understand is that inside Visual Studio, our projects have some predefined conditional compilation symbols. So for example, if inside Visual Studio, I were to go to a Windows Store application, right-click on the project for it, and go to Properties. On the Build tab for the properties, I could see this conditional compilation symbols entry of netfx_core. Conversely, if I looked at the same properties for a Windows Phone 8 application, I see a different set of conditional compilation symbols. We have Silverlight and Windows_phone. But that's going to give me a way in my code to test in the compiler, hey, are we being compiled for NetFX Core? In which case I know this compile is being done by the Windows 8 project. Or are we being compiled for Windows_phone, in which case I know it's for the phone project. And we can use that to create different code blocks using the if preprocessor directives. So for example, if you look at the source code on the screen, the section highlighted in blue starts with this #if. Now that's a preprocessor directive that the C# compiler is looking for. And we're basically telling the compiler, hey, if you're compiling this source code against the NetFX Core project, which is our Windows Store app, then here's the code I'd like you to actually compile. If, on the other hand, you're using it for the Windows_phone project compilation, then use this block of code. And that's going to give me a way to do this conditional compilation and create code that compiles differently for Windows 8 versus Windows Phone 8, although it exists in the same code file. Another way that we could differentiate code for Windows 8 from Windows Phone 8 is to use partial classes. So I could have a common code file that's shared across both projects and that has all the code that is universal to both platforms in it. For any code that was unique to Windows 8, however, I could create a second code file in the Windows 8 project, which was a partial class. I just have to make sure that the original source file was also marked as a partial class. And then I could add any Windows 8 specific code into the Windows 8 partial class code file. Additionally, I could create a specific partial class file in the Windows Phone project and include any Windows Phone specific code in there. And so as the compiler built each project, it would use the partial class files in the project it was compiling. So with that, let's go take a look at using shared source code between Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 applications. First thing I'd like to show you is that the slides and demo files for this session are all available online up at the Windows 8 appfactor.com website. You can follow the link to the content, and if you scroll down, you can see that there's content for all the other sessions, but down here is the best practices for creating reusable .NET code, and you can download the slides and demos from there. And when this video is complete, I'll post it up here as well. I've already downloaded the demo files, though. I've got those extracted to a file here on my C drive called PCL for portable class libraries. And in there you can see I've got the slides, both PowerPoint and PDF versions of them. And in the demos folder, there's a few subfolders. The before folder has any projects that you'll need to start a demo where it's appropriate. The after folder contains the completed versions of the demos. And the assets folder in this demo just has a single file. It's this snippets file, which is a text file that has information, step-by-step instructions, and even code that you can copy and paste right into Visual Studio there. Now, in fact, I'm going to move this snippet file off to the second screen on my computer here, so I've got that handy for me. And back over here, we'll start up Visual Studio. And in this case, I want to create a file, new project, and I'm going to do a Windows Store app to start with. I'm going to pick the blank app project, and I'm going to call the project codereuse.win8. This is actually going to be the assembly name as well as the .NET namespace for this Windows 8 Store project here. It's going to go into the before folder for this demo. But for the solution, I'm actually going to have multiple projects in the solution. So the solution won't all be Win8. So I'm going to remove that portion from the solution name and just call it code reuse. All right, not going to mess with source control or anything in here, just say OK. Now we're talking about sharing code, so in this solution next to my Windows 8 project, I want to also have a phone project. So I'm going to add a new project to the solution, and this time I'll pick Windows Phone in the Windows Phone app project template, and we'll call it codereuse.phone8. And notice that I can target the different versions. In this case, I want OS 8.0 though, so I'll say OK. And so there's my two projects. I've got the Windows 8 project as well as the Phone 8 project inside there. So I now want to be able to have some code that I can share across these two. So for example, let's say that I wanted to allow a way to send a URL to a method that launched the web browser on whatever the platform was. And it actually turns out that there is a common way to do that across the two platforms using the Windows Phone runtime. And that's with the windows.system.launcher.launchURI async method. And I said Windows Phone runtime. It's really the Windows runtime in Windows Store or the Windows Phone runtime in the phone side. But that single class and method is available on both platforms here. So I'm going to start by writing the code in the Windows 8 project. And then I'll just create a folder here. I'm going to add in a new folder. I'm going to call it Helpers. And into that, I'm going to right-click and add a new class. And this class is going to be called my Web Helper. And a couple of things here. One of the first things I want to do is fix the namespace. Because I'm going to be calling this from both projects, I really want to get the platform-specific portion of the name out of the namespace. So this will just be in codereuse.helpers out there. And I'm going to make the class here a public static class because I just want a method that I can easily call without having to create an instance of Web Helper here. So we'll create a public static void method that's going to allow me to open some URL in the browser. And so I'm going to need to take in an argument, which is the URL that I want to have it open. And then I can go to windows.system.launcher. And I see that the launcher, let me come back into that. Launcher starts the default app associated with the specified file or protocol. And if I pass in an HTTP protocol, that's going to open up the web browser for me. So I'm going to use the launcher. And the launcher has this launch URI async method on it that basically takes in a URI as its argument. So I need to new up a URI. We'll pass in the URL argument that came into the method. And this will, we're going to assume, always be an absolute URL. And there you go. Now, this method is being called asynchronously, but in this demo, I don't really care about the result that comes back, so I'm not going to await the result or anything like that, although I could do that in Windows Phone 8 and Windows 8 as well. So, all right, so that looks good. So I can save this up. Let's build it and make sure it works. And my build succeeded. Now I'd like to be able to use that same code file for my Phone 8 project. So I'm going to come up to the Phone 8 project, right-click, and again, add a new folder. Just call it Helpers. You don't have to have them in the same structure, but I'm going to do it for consistency purposes. And on the Helpers file, I don't want to make a new class because the class file already exists down here in Windows 8. So instead, in Windows Phone 8, what I want to do is right-click and add an existing item, not a new item. So I'll pick existing item, and then I'm going to browse up through my solution over to the Windows 8 project, down into its helpers folder, and there's the original webhelper.cs. Now I need to be careful here. I don't want to click on the add button because that'll add a copy of that source code file, and I'll have two versions of the file, one for Windows 8 and one for Windows Phone. I don't want to do that. I want to have a common file, so if I edit it in one place, those changes are available in the other. And in this drop down here, you'll notice then that I can, instead of adding it, add it as a link. And so that's what I want to do here. So I'll add it as a link. Now the icon here is really small, but it's basically the regular C# file icon, but with a little shortcut arrow sitting over the top of it. And that's your visual clue that this is a linked file, right? So the original physical file is here, and this is really just a link off to that file. And if I try to open it here, it tells me that the document is opened by another project. And that's because I had the web helper already open from the Windows 8 project side. So let's go ahead and close it there. And then I'll show you that I can open it from the phone project, and it lets me get into there. Pretty cool. All right, so now I've got this common file across the two platforms. Actually, let's really quick, we'll go do a build here, make sure everything builds successfully. All right, good. So we're looking good. And now I want to go actually use that class from both of these projects. So let's, I'm going to close up my windows here. And down in the Windows 8 project, we'll use it down here first. So on mainpage.xaml, I'm going to open up that designer. And this is going to be a pretty low-tech demo here. We'll just go to the toolbox. We'll grab a button and drag a button onto the page. Looks good. I'm going to name the button Web Button, although the button doesn't, or the name doesn't really matter. I'm not going to use it anywhere. But then to wire up the click event handler on this button, I'm going to double click, get into the web button click event handler, and I'm going to use from that code reuse.helpers namespace that web helpers class, and there's that open URL method. And I'm going to have it just open the Windows 8 App Factor website for me in whatever the default app is on this platform. Cool. So there's that code, and I could go ahead and debug this on the local machine. There's my beautiful button, and when I click on it, notice that it launches the browser and takes me off to the Windows 8 appfactor.com website. All right, pretty cool. Actually, let's go shut this app down. Okay. So now back over in my Solution Explorer, I want to do basically the same thing with my phone project. So there again, let's close these windows up just so we don't get confused. And I'll open mainpage.xaml from the phone project. And again, in the toolbox, I'm going to go in and just grab a button. We'll drop it out here on the page somewhere. Again, just to be consistent, I'll go ahead into the properties and call it Web Button. And notice that I can do the exact same thing here. I can open this up, come in here, and then call that code reuse.webhelper, or sorry, .helpers.webhelper.openurl http Windows 8 appfactor.com. All right. So same code here, and that's the great thing about this is because that web helper is shared across them, I can use it the same way from both of these platforms here. So let's go ahead and run that. Oh, actually, I've still got my Windows 8 project set to the startup project. So back over here in Visual Studio, I'll, in my Solution Explorer, right-click on Phone 8, set as the startup project, and we'll run that in the emulator. Great. And now I can click on the button. Yes, confirm the recommended settings for Internet Explorer on the phone emulator there. And there's my appfactor.com website. All right, so that's great, and that's an easy way to share source code if it's identical between the two platforms. If you needed to have something a little bit different between them, we talked in the slides about being able to use if preprocessor directives or partial class files. I'm going to go ahead and just demo the conditional compilation with the if preprocessor directives. If I come down to my Windows 8 project and go to its properties, get down to the bottom here, on the build page, I can see that it's got this conditional compilation symbol of netfx core. And so we can test for that using an if preprocessor directive. Similarly, if I look at the properties for my Windows Phone project, it has this on the build tab, Windows Phone conditional compilation symbol. So that's the one I'm going to test for in my phone projects. Now, in my demo here, I'm going to go ahead and just implement alternate code for my web helper method, which is a little silly because that's the only code in this file. But let's say there were other methods which were common, but this one I wanted to have behave differently. Notice also right now I've opened it up from the Phone 8 project, so that's the version that I have open. And I want to close that and go back down to Windows 8 so that I'm editing the Windows 8 version of the source here first. And basically, I can now come in here and add in this if preprocessor directive and basically just say, hey, if you are running or being compiled for netfx core, then here's the code I'd like you to use. And I'll put my end if down there. Now, I could come down here secondarily and say, okay, well, if you're running for Windows _phone, on the other hand, here's a different method that I'd like you to implement for that. And I can go ahead and I'm just going to steal some code here from my snippet file, and I'll paste in an alternate version of the OpenURL method in there. And notice that it's grayed out, and that's because when I open Web Helper, I opened it from the helpers folder in the Windows 8 project. And so for the current project, netfx core is true, and so that's where I see the colored code. Let's go ahead and save this up and close it and go back up to the Phone 8 reference. And notice now the netfx core code is grayed out, and the Windows Phone code is available to me. I've got some IntelliSense squiggles there, so I'm going to go ahead and resolve those. I need to import the system.windows namespace, and I need to import the Windows Phone tasks namespace for this web browser task. Now, those are specific to Windows Phone. So back up here where it just pulled those in, actually, let's go grab this here. And we're going to add in another if Windows Phone, so that those namespaces only get imported if we are in fact compiling for Windows Phone out there. Great. So the Windows Phone specific code down here does a couple of things. First of all, we're going to show a message box, and that way we know for sure that we're getting the Windows version, or sorry, the Windows Phone version of that code, because the store version didn't have a message dialog or anything in there. And then in the phone, another way to show something in the web browser is to use this thing called a web browser task. We'll new one up, give it the URI of the URL that that got passed in as the argument, and then show the browser task. So notice that's a different way of doing it than the Windows Store way. All right, so that's an example of using those preprocessor directives. So let's do a quick little build here, make sure everything builds okay, looking good. And this time again, we'll come down here and set the Windows Phone 8 as Windows 8 as the startup project, and we'll debug the Windows 8 version. And we should see that it still works. So it's getting its version. And notice no message box or anything like that popped up here. So we'll go close this Actually, we can close the browser up here as well. And then we'll set our Phone8 project as startup. I'll get out of debug. And debug it in the emulator. Notice now when I click on the button, I get this message box on the phone that pops up and says, hey, you're using the browser task or the Windows Phone version. Yet it does still navigate me off to the web page. Pretty cool. All right, so that's an example of using shared source code files and conditional compilation symbols with if preprocessor directives to create common code in both Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 applications. So we can see that using shared source code files is a great way to share code between Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 applications. The biggest limitation of it, though, is that you need access to the actual source code files themselves. If you wanted to be able to have a reusable assembly, a DLL, that you could target from future projects, then you might want to take a look at portable class libraries. Portable class libraries are a new feature fully supported in Visual Studio 2012, and they allow you to create a single assembly, DLL, that you can target from .NET 4.5, Windows Store, Windows Phone, and even Xbox and Silverlight applications. Now, as you create a portable class library, you get to choose which of those target frameworks you wish to support. And the more target frameworks you support, the smaller the surface area of the .NET APIs you can consume from the portable library itself. So for example, if you were to target just .NET 4.5, you'd have the full .NET framework available within your portable class library. But if you say, well, I want this portable class library to also be consumed from Windows Store applications, then there's a smaller subset of the overall .NET framework that you can consume. That's going to give you a restricted surface area inside your portable class libraries. If you furthermore targeted, let's say, Windows Phone 7.5, again, the set of APIs that your portable class library has access to becomes smaller still. So the impact of that is that you want to target as few frameworks as you can in your portable class library, but target as many as you need to get the reuse you're looking for. Now inside MSDN, portable class libraries are pretty well documented. As you're browsing around looking at types and things like that inside MSDN, you can look for the little portable class library support icon to the left of a member on a class, and at the bottom of the class definition and version information, you can look for the portable class library support. To create a portable class library project in Visual Studio, it's actually under the Windows category of installed project templates. You pick the portable class library project template and then choose those target frameworks. So again, here's where you want to be as restrictive as you can, but you turn on the checkbox for as many as you need. Notice there's also drop downs for like Silverlight 4 and Windows Phone where you can choose the version that you want to support. And the higher the version number, the bigger the API service will be. Another thing that you'll deal with in portable code is that sometimes, just as we saw with shared source code, is that there's going to be things that need to be done differently in Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. And so one way that we can deal with that is to use some abstractions. We could use either interfaces, where in the portable code we define some interface. Let's say our portable code knows that we need a data service, but maybe I get the data differently in Windows 8 than I would in Windows Phone 8. So the portable class library would define this data service interface, and then I'd implement the interface with concrete classes inside my Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 applications. Similarly, if there is some code that is portable, but you need different code in the platforms for certain features, then you could create abstract classes that have the core functionality and maybe even some abstract methods. You could then come in and inherit from that base class in the platform-specific code and implement any abstract methods where needed. Another key thing to think about as you're creating portable class libraries and portable projects is how we deal with the separation of the code that deals with our data and the code that deals with display. And MVVM is a common pattern in XAML and C# applications for doing just that, for separating the concerns of how do we deal with data versus how do we deal with display of data. MVVM stands for Model, View, View Model, where the model is really the data classes and possibly the services that help us manipulate that data, maybe calling into web services or data stores, whatever. The view model encapsulates that model data and adds additional features required by the view, like events and commands and other public properties. And then the view is the actual user interface layer. In a XAML C# scenario, that's the XAML stuff, right? And that's where we consume the view model, show data through data binding, wire up to commands, and listen for events and all that kind of stuff provided by the view model. MVVM is a great fit for portable class libraries because we can typically fit most of our MVVM models and view models up in the portable class library itself. And then we can just write the view-specific logic inside the Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 projects. There's actually a number of MVVM frameworks out there, but they all kind of rely on some common features inside the .NET framework itself. Things like the iNotify property changed interface to create observable objects. There's standard patterns like inversion of control and dependency injection for doing view model and service locators. We've got the iCommand interface in .NET that allow me to wire commands on controls up to actions or methods back in the view model. Things for messaging and eventing and navigation are just standard things inside the .NET framework. Now, you could sort of roll your own MVVM framework that wraps that underlying functionality up into some handy classes, or you could go out and use a third-party library. Now, MVVM Cross is a cross-platform MVVM framework, and there's a link off to information about that there. But probably the most popular MVVM framework in sort of the XAML C# world is MVVM Lite from Laurent Bugnon. And you can find out more about that using the link on the screen as well. But we'll use that in the demo coming up. Now, as you go out to create portable class libraries, especially using things like MVVM and consuming data like JSON, etc., you're going to need to import some libraries into your portable class library and possibly into the platform-specific projects as well. And NuGet is a great way inside Visual Studio to get to all those libraries that we need, to add the right references, make sure we've met all the dependencies for them, etc. So there's some helpful NuGet packages that you'll want to use maybe inside these portable class library and platform-specific projects. There's MVVM Lite Libraries Only, PCL. That's a portable version of the MVVM Lite library. There's async for .NET Framework 4, Silverlight 4, 5, and Windows Phone 7, 5, and 8. And that's going to give you async and await functionality in your portable class libraries that target those frameworks. Newtonsoft.json is a great JSON serialization deserialization library for working with JSON data, and it is portable. Windows Phone and Windows 8 actually implement their sort of simple HTTP client differently. In Windows Store apps, it's an HTTP client. In Windows Phone apps, it's a web client. And so Microsoft has currently in pre-release this Microsoft.NET HTTP portable HTTP client that you can use within your portable class libraries to do things like access HTTP content, upload or download JSON data, etc., from directly within your portable class library. And then I mentioned MVVM Cross as well, and you can also pull that down through NuGet. If you want to know more about NuGet, you can follow the link at the bottom of the screen. And finally, then, there's a ton of other great resources on these topics. I'm not going to talk through each one of these. You can grab the slides and use the links on the slide here to learn more about portable class libraries, MVVM, MVVM Lite, MVVM Cross, more and more and more. So let's go do a demo of using portable class libraries and MVVM in both Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. I'll switch over to Visual Studio here. And I've got the solution from the previous demo already open, so I'm just going to keep working with that. But now I want to add in a new project. This is going to be from the Windows category and a portable class library. And I'm going to go ahead and call this code reuse.portable out there. And say OK. And this is where I get to choose the different frameworks that I want to target. I actually just want Windows Store apps and Windows Phone 8 applications. If I clear the other checkboxes, though, it gives me some information down here and says, all right, well, with the selected frameworks, you're not going to be able to open this project up in Studio 2010. There's actually an update for Studio 2010 that does let you work with portable class library projects, but it can't do Phone 8 or Store app development. It also tells me down here that even though I've deselected the .NET Framework 4.5, it's going to include it anyhow because the Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 runtimes need that. So I'll just say OK. And it's created this new project for me over here in my solution. It's giving me this default class file that I don't need, so I'll just delete that and say OK. So I know that I want to use a few things. I want to use MVVM Lite. I want to use HTTP to go out and pull down some JSON data and be able to retrieve that asynchronously and then load it into my MVVM model and view models for me. So the easiest way to do that is to use NuGet. Now, NuGet's a feature in Visual Studio. I could go to an individual project and manage the NuGet packages for that project. However, there's some packages that I need on multiple projects. So an easier way to do that is to just manage the NuGet packages for the solution by right-clicking on the solution itself. And in there, then, there's a few NuGet packages I want. So first, I know I want to use JSON.NET. So I'm just typing into the search box up here in the online category. And I see this JSON.NET coming in there for me. And so I'm going to pick that one. I see that it has no dependencies, so it doesn't install anything else. I'll go ahead and hit install, but I only really deal with JSON data from my portable class library. So I'm going to clear out the check marks and not install that package into the Phone 8 and Windows 8 projects, just into the portable one. I'll say OK, and it'll go download the package for me and install it. Now the next one that I want is the ability to do async await stuff. So I'm going to pull up Microsoft.bcl.async. Now this one, if I look at its dependencies, actually installs another package called Microsoft.bcl, which in turn has its own dependency on Microsoft.bcl.build. And we'll see that NuGet's going to install that whole dependency stack for me. So I'm going to pick that one and say install. And I want this actually available in all of them, so I can use the same async and await and task mechanisms across my projects here. So I'll turn all of them on and say OK. And here it's going to confirm the license agreements for each of those packages that are being installed. I'll accept it, and it'll go and install those for me. All right. Now I know that I'm also going to be working with MVVM, and there is actually an MVVM Lite portable implementation. And that's this portable.mvvm Lite libs. And so I'm going to install that as well. And again, I'm going to install that across all of my packages because I'm going to need to be able to interact with my view model in both the Phone 8 and Windows 8 projects, but it'll exist down in the portable library. So I'll target all of them, and again, accept the license agreement. And now the last library that I want to install here through NuGet is that HTTP client library. Now in order to get that, I have to make sure that I have my search results set to include pre-release, because it's, at least at this time, it's pre-release. And the name for the packages is Microsoft.net.http. So I'll pick that one, and here it is. It's this HTTP client libraries. I can see there that it's pre-release. But I'm going to install that. In this case, it's really just the portable library that's going to talk to the web. So I'm going to clear the checkboxes for Phone 8 and Windows 8, at least in terms of downloading stuff programmatically over HTTP. So I'll say OK and accept the license agreement. Cool. So that gave me a really easy way to just install all the libraries that I need across all of my packages. So I'm going to close up my NuGet package manager there and come back over here to Visual Studio. So now remember I said that with MVVM, we can put our models and view models down inside our portable class libraries. And what we're going to be doing is retrieving some JSON data from a sample file that's hosted up on the Windows 8 appfactor.com website. So let me go back over here to my browser, and I'm going to paste in this URL. It's windows8appfactor.com/sample data/team.json, and you can go look that up yourself. It's really just a text file sitting up there in a directory on my server that has JSON data in it. And I'll go ahead and pull that up in the browser here, and it doesn't look pretty in IE. I've reconfigured IE to show me the text of JSON rather than trying to save it as a file. If you're interested in how to do that, you can look in the snippet files for some registry changes you'll have to make. But basically, I see that I've got a bunch of team members, Adam Tuliburn, Alice Pang, Bruno Turkoli, et cetera, et cetera. These are all other evangelists that work on my team here, as well as links off to their blogs. And I've also got a pictures folder up there that has a photo for each of them in that sample data directory. So this is the JSON data that I want to be able to consume. And so back over in my portable class library, I need to have some classes that the JSON deserializer can use to create concrete versions of that JSON data. So in my portable library, I'm going to right-click and add in a new folder. We'll call it model. And the first one that I want to add in here is a class that represents an individual team member. So I'm going to right-click in here and add a class. We'll call it teammember.cs. And this guy, I want to make sure that it's public, and I want to have it go out and implement from the MVVM Lite, MVVM Lite.observable object. base class out there, right? And that's going to let this implement the iNotify property change. Now, I actually have source code for this. I'm just going to paste in from the code file. So I've just selected everything and pasted that in. So I see I've got my team member, which inherits from observable object, and then it's just got some properties on it: first name, last name, blog URL, and picture URL. Now, the JSON.NET deserializer will just use these property names to match up to the JSON names and create these classes or class instances for me. So that's really cool. Now, if I go back and look at that JSON data, I close this. Let me go pull it up again. Notice that there's first a data array that includes individual team member instances. And so really the JSON data is pulling back this array. And I want to serialize that array of team members into sort of a team, if you will. So I need a class that represents the full team. So back over here in my model, I'm going to right click and add in another new class. We'll call this one team.cs. And again, I'm going to paste in some code from my snippet file to implement that. And basically you can see it's just a public class called team that has nothing but a single property on it called members, which is just a list of those team members guy. And we've told the JSON deserializer that, hey, when it encounters that data element in the return value, it should deserialize that array of JSON objects into a list of their corresponding team member instances for me. Pretty cool. All right, so that's really just there to help me deserialize the values that come back. So we can save that up, do a build, and make sure that all works. Now, in order to actually talk to the JSON file up on the web, though, that's really where this idea of a data service comes in, something that knows how to go get the data for me and then pull it down. And this is one of those places where you might have to do that differently in Windows 8 versus Windows Phone 8. So I'm going to go ahead and flesh this out by first creating an interface for my data service. And then you could create concrete data services in the platform-specific projects. I'm just going to go ahead and create a portable one, though, here. But at least you'll see that we could interface this out. So the first thing I'm going to do in my model class is right-click and add a new item. This time it's going to be an interface, and this is going to be my iData service interface. And paste in some code from my snippet file here. This just has a single method on it called getTeam, and that's going to be an asynchronous task that returns a list of team members back to the caller there. And so now, again, I could go create classes that implement this data service in my platform-specific projects. For me, I'll just go ahead and create one here. So I'm going to now add a concrete class. We'll call it data service. And it's going to go and inherit from that iData service interface out there. And I'm going to need to then add an actual implementation for that getTeam method. So again, I'm going to cheat and steal some code. And so this code here for the getTeam method is going to use that portable HTTP client that we imported there through NuGet and new up an instance of that. And then we're going to tell it to go get the string asynchronously from that team.json file we took a look at earlier. It's going to await it. That await functionality right there was facilitated through that Microsoft.bcl.async NuGet package that we added in. We'll pull it into our JSON string. Then we'll use the JSON deserializer that came from our JSON.NET NuGet package and pull that into a deserialized collection of team. And then we can return back the members from the team. So that's how we'll get our collection back there. So pretty cool. These all depended heavily on NuGet. The portable library for HTTP, the async and await functionality, and the JSON.NET deserializer out there. Pretty cool. So we can build that all up. And at this point then, I've got my model. I now want to be able to wrap that model up so that I can expose it to my views through the view model. So I'm going to make another folder in my portable class library. I'll call this view model. And inside there, I'm going to right click and add in another new class, and this is going to be my main view model that we pull up from our main page. And this guy would want to go out and inherit, again, from another Galasoft MVVM Lite.view model base. But again, I'm going to pull in a code snippet here just so you don't have to watch me type all of this. And we'll talk through the code. And so I see that this guy has a private member, which is an instance of that iData service. It's got a public property on it, which is an observable collection, which means my view can bind up to this collection and be notified when new team members are added or removed. And that thing's called team. And then in the constructor, we go ahead and just create a concrete version of that portable data service as our internal data service instance. We initialize a new collection of those team members as our team, and then the load team is going to go out and use the data services get team, and that's that method that went out, called up to HTTP, pulled it back, JSON deserialized it, etc. for us. And then we grab the team that came back, loop through, and add each of the members we retrieved into our local team collection back here. Now, if there were an exception, we could do things like showing messages, and that would be different, right? We show messages differently in Windows 8 than we do in Windows Phone, so I might want to go implement something like a dialogue service. I'm not going to get into that here just because of time constraints, but that's maybe where I would do that. So that's all looking good, and at this point, I've got all of my portable code, sorry, wrong window there, all of my portable code implemented. So the next piece would be to go into my platform-specific projects and use that portable code. So we're going to start that with Windows 8 down here. I want to add a reference up to that portable class library for my Windows 8 project. So that's cool. So I've got that in there. And then I'm going to open up mainpage.xaml here. And in order to use that view model out of the portable class library, I have to have a XAML namespace that lets me talk to it. So I'm going to come into my mainpage.xaml here, and I'm going to add in an XMLNS. And we'll call this VM, how about, for view model equals, and there's that. Looks like I maybe back here forgot to make my view model public. Oh, it's there. Let's do a build. Try that again. All right, so we're going to come in, XMLNS, VM equals. All right, there it is. Looked like it just had to do a build to get that to pop up, but there's code reuse.portable.viewModel. And now inside there, I could, for example, create at my page level a data context, which is an instance of that VM main view model. Cool, right? So now this guy's going to get its data from that main view model. Main view model gets its data from the data service, which goes up to HTTP and pulls back that JSON data and creates a collection of team members. Awesome stuff, right? And then down here in the grid, right now I've got this button down there. We're going to delete that button. We don't need that. And I'm going to paste in some UI here that we can use for a data template. So I'll add this in as a resource. Now, if you looked at the data binding demos previously in the Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8.NET development overview, we talked about resources and data templates. So here I'm defining a resource, which is a data template called Team Member Grid View Template. And then down below, inside the grid on the page, we'll actually paste in some UI here that does nothing more than basically add a text block in for the title called the team, and then down below is a grid view. I used a list view in an earlier demo. Here I'm using a grid view, and it uses that template, and I can actually see all those teammates coming in. Those are actually team member instances being displayed through data binding that came back through that JSON file off the web. The designer is really cool that it'll show that to me. But there it is. And now there's one other thing that I want to do. I want to be able to wire up a click event handler when you click on one of those items in the grid view. So I'm going to come in here and we'll add in a selection changed event, and we'll just go to a method called grid view selection changed, and I'll go implement that method here. And all I'm going to do back there is remember that web helper that we created before. I'm simply going to go grab the member out of the selection, grab its URL, and then use the code reuse helper to navigate off to its blog. Really cool. All right, so we can save that up, and let's actually run it and see if we work. First, let's change our startup project to Windows 8. All right, and there they are. And if I click on one of my team members, like Chris Avis, it takes me off and shows me his blog. Pretty cool. All right, so that's my Windows 8 view, really consuming the view model and the model back from the portable class library. All the data service functionality, the web functionality was all done in the portable library. That means if I want to turn around and do the same thing from a Windows Phone 8 application, it shouldn't be that hard. So I'm going to close this up. We'll jump back over to Visual Studio here. And let's jump back up to the Phone 8 project here. And before I forget, I'm going to set this guy up as the startup project. And again, I need to go in and right-click on this into the references and add a reference off to that portable project. So I can use the portable code there. And similarly here, I've got my main page.xaml. Inside main page.xaml, though, let's first go to a build. So I know I've got my references in there correctly. And we'll come back and do an XMLNS for the view model, just like we did previously. And there's my code reuse.portable.view model that I'm going to pull in. Looking good. And then similarly on the page, I should be able to come in, and this time it's a phone application page dot data context. We'll do a view model, main view model instance, and there's the data context. So then, just like we had a resource for the data template in the Windows Store app, we'll have a resource for the data template here. And it's, again, just going to show a grid of some details about my, my team member there. And then down inside the page itself, rather than a list view, which is what we use, or actually a grid view, which is what we used back in the Windows Store app in this case, we'll use a long list selector. In fact, again, boom, you can already see my code coming up there for me. So that's pretty cool. It, too, has this selection changed event handler that I need to implement, though. So I'm going to navigate back to that event handler, and the code that I'm going to paste in there for that, again, coming from the snippet file there, is pretty much identical to what I used over in the Windows Store app. We're going to go grab from the selection the current item as a team member, grab its URL, and then use the web helper open URL method to do that. Now, remember in this case, this was back from the shared source demo, and in the phone side, web helper was going to toss up this message box. Oh, it looks like I already had that open. Let's go close that. There we go. There's the message box. We don't need to see the message box anymore. I'm going to comment that out. Okay, let's give it a run in the emulator. There's my list of teammates. I can scroll up and down through them, and if I pick on any one of them, let's say Michael Palermo down here, I navigate off, and I can see Michael's blog there on the phone. Very cool. All right. So this session ran a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but we got a chance to see a couple of different ways that we could reuse code between Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 projects. First, we looked at shared source as a way of simply reusing the same source code files across multiple projects, and ways that we could differentiate code with conditional compilation symbols and if preprocessor directives. Then we came back in and looked at portable class libraries as a way of creating reusable assemblies that we can target from multiple frameworks, and how we could leverage best practices and patterns like MVVM to really take advantage of portable class libraries. So hopefully this gives you some great ideas to continue and create your own portable applications.